Have you ever had that one simple rule? A line in the sand that everyone who knows you understands is not to be crossed. It's not about control. It's about respect. For me, that line was Crystal. A woman from my wife Sarah's past who was a vortex of chaos and bad decisions. I'd seen the fallout before, the broken plans, the drained bank accounts, the emotional wreckage she left in her wake. So, my rule was simple, non-negotiable. Sarah was to have no contact with her. I'd made that clear. Sarah had agreed. But then, the text came. A weekend girls' trip to Vegas. Just the two of them. I remember the way Sarah's phone lit up the room, the way her face shifted, a flicker of guilt quickly masked by defiance. "It's just a weekend," she'd said, her voice a little too bright. "We need to let loose, that's all." I stood my ground. I laid it out for her, calmly. I told her that woman was a poison, and that if she chose to walk into that fire, knowing how I felt, she shouldn't bother coming back. The words hung in the air, heavy and final. I wasn't making a threat. I was stating a consequence. She packed a bag. The sound of the zipper closing felt like a suture. She didn't look at me as she walked out the door, her suitcase wheels clicking on the tile. The house was instantly different. It wasn't just quiet, it was hollow. I didn't rage. I didn't cry. A strange, cold clarity settled over me. She had been warned. She had made her choice. And so, I began to make mine. I went to the closet and pulled out a second, larger suitcase. I methodically filled it with her clothes, her shoes, the jewelry box I'd saved for months to buy her. Every item I placed inside felt like I was packing away a memory, sealing it in cardboard. I didn't leave a single trace of her in our bedroom. By the time I was done, her side of the closet was a barren wasteland. I stacked the boxes by the front door, a silent monument to a broken promise. Then, I changed the locks. The night was long. Every creak of the house was a betrayal of hope, a thought that maybe, just maybe, she'd come to her senses and was on her way home. But the driveway remained empty. My phone was silent. I imagined the flashing lights of the casinos, the clinking glasses, the laughter that I knew was fueled by Crystal's reckless energy. I didn't sleep. I just sat in the living room, in the dark, waiting for the sun to rise on a new, and terribly different, life. Dawn came, pale and gray. The rain had started, a steady, weeping drizzle. And then, a sound. Not the chirp of her car alarm, but a frantic, desperate pounding on the front door. Boom. 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 It wasn't a knock, it was a collapse. I walked slowly to the door, my heart a cold, hard stone in my chest. I turned the knob and opened it. And there she was. Sarah. But it wasn't her. This was a ghost, a shattered reflection of the woman who had left barely 24 hours before. Her hair was plastered to her face, soaked with rain and tears. Her mascara was a black river streaming down her cheeks. She was shivering violently, clutching her small trip bag like a lifeline. The confident, defiant woman who had walked out was gone, replaced by a soul drowning in pure, unadulterated regret. She tried to speak, but all that came out were choked, guttural sobs. I'm so sorry," she finally managed, her voice breaking on every syllable. Her body trembled as she looked past me, her eyes widening in horror at the sight of the stacked boxes. What is that?" "It's your things, Sarah," I said, my voice terrifyingly even. "You made a choice." The words broke her. She crumpled, her knees buckling, and she fell against the doorframe, her whole body racked with heaving cries. "It was a mistake. A terrible, horrible mistake," she wailed. "You were right about everything. Everything." She told me the story between ragged breaths and broken sentences. Crystal had maxed out her credit card within hours of arriving. They'd gotten into a screaming match with a blackjack dealer. The final, crushing blow came when they returned to their hotel room to find it cleared out. Crystal had brought a man back, and he had stolen Sarah's purse, with her wallet, her ID, and the emergency cash I'd given her. Crystal, in a fit of panic, had simply vanished, leaving Sarah alone, penniless, and stranded in a city that had suddenly turned monstrous. She'd had to beg the front desk to use a phone to call a friend for a wire transfer just to get a bus ticket home. She had spent the entire night in a grimy bus station, the reality of her decision crashing down on her with the weight of an avalanche. "I have nothing," she whispered, her face a mask of utter devastation. "I have no one. I lost it all for a weekend of nothing." She looked up at me, her eyes pleading, begging for a salvation she knew she didn't deserve. "Please. Please, I will do anything. I'll never question you again. I'll never speak to her again. Just, please don't leave me. I can't breathe without you." She was on her knees, in the pouring rain, at the threshold of a home that was no longer hers, looking up at the man whose trust she had set on fire for a cheap thrill. The consequence was no longer an abstract idea. It was real, it was cold, and it was staring right back at her from my eyes. And the most terrifying part? The door was still open. The choice of what happened next, of whether that door would close forever or let her back in, was now entirely and solely mine. I want to be honest for a moment, not as a storyteller, but as a real person. What happened in this story taught me something important. When someone ignores a clear boundary, especially after you explain how serious it is, that is not a small mistake. That is a choice. Love is not just words. Love is respect, listening, and taking your partner seriously. I do not believe relationships end because of one trip, one argument, or one bad decision. They end when one person feels unheard for too long. That was my breaking point. Not anger. Not jealousy. Just the feeling that my voice did not matter anymore. Maybe some people will say I overreacted. Maybe others will say I did the right thing. But for me, staying would have meant accepting something I could not live with. Now I want to ask you, what would you have done in my place? Would you have stayed and tried again, or would you have walked away the same way I did? Do you think setting boundaries is necessary in a relationship, even if it risks losing the person you love? Tell me your opinion in the comments. I read them, and I really want to know what you think. If this story made you reflect, or if you have lived something similar, feel free to share. Thank you for listening until the end.